Everything around you seems louder than it should be. News moves too fast. Opinions collide, certainties fall apart in real time. Yet, in the middle of all this noise, there's something unexpected happening inside you. A strange calm, not relief, not joy. Just a quiet certainty you can't fully explain. It's as if part of you isn't surprised by any of this, as if something has been watching the build-up for a long time, waiting for this exact moment. You may still feel tension, fatigue, even confusion, but beneath that there's steadiness, a sense that this chaos isn't random and that you're not lost inside it. That calm didn't appear by chance. It wasn't created overnight. It was shaped slowly, through moments you didn't understand at the time. And now, while the world feels unstable, that inner certainty is asking to be noticed. Nothing in your life repeated by accident, not the same kind of relationship showing up with a different face, not the same conversations ending in the same silence, not the same choices leading you back to the same emotional place, wondering how you got there again. What you called bad luck was often a pattern asking for your attention, and patterns don't repeat to punish you. They repeat to be recognized. Think about it honestly. There were moments when you felt you had already lived that scene before, a decision that felt familiar even as you were making it, a warning signal in your body that you learned to override, a quiet discomfort that came before the collapse, not after. Those moments weren't random glitches in life, they were rehearsals. Your consciousness was running simulations long before you understood the lesson. We tend to believe that growth should look linear. One mistake, one lesson, one correction. But human awareness doesn't work like a straight line. It works more like a compass that keeps pointing to the same direction until you actually change course. The same emotional territory appears again and again because something in you hasn't integrated yet. Not because you're slow, not because you've failed, but because recognition precedes change. There is a subtle difference between seeing and noticing. You saw the patterns. You noticed them only when the cost became too high. Before that, the mind is very good at creating explanations. Different job, same frustration. Different partner, same loneliness. Different city, same inner tension. The surface details changed, so it felt new. But underneath, the signal was identical. Your nervous system knew it. Your body reacted faster than your thoughts. That tightness in the chest, that drop in energy, that sense of déjà vu you couldn't explain. That was data. Here's where honesty matters. At times, ignoring patterns feels safer than naming them. Because naming them implies responsibility. It implies that something in you is participating, not just reacting. This is uncomfortable, so the mind prefers stories. Timing wasn't right, people are complicated, life is unfair. Sometimes those stories are partially true, but they can also become noise that hides the signal, and consciousness doesn't stop sending signals just because you choose not to decode them. There's also a common bias at play. We often look for meaning only after things fall apart, but preparation usually happens quietly, without drama. A repeated discomfort is not dramatic enough to trigger action, until it accumulates, until the pattern tightens, until what could have been a small adjustment becomes a forced reset. That's not punishment. That's delayed listening. If you slow down for a moment and scan your memory, certain cycles stand out more clearly now than they did before. The moments you compromised something essential, the times you stayed longer than your energy could sustain, the decisions that made sense on paper but felt wrong in your body. Each repetition refined your sensitivity. Each cycle sharpened your awareness, even if it didn't feel like progress at the time. This is where many people misunderstand preparation. They expect it to feel empowering, but often it feels frustrating, like life is circling the same block. In reality, each loop was slightly different. You noticed a bit more, you tolerated a bit less, you recovered a bit faster. That's training, subtle, internal, easy to dismiss if you're only measuring external outcomes. There's another layer that's harder to accept. Sometimes the pattern wasn't just outside of you. It was the way you interpreted situations, the assumptions you made, the meaning you assigned automatically. Two people can live the same event and extract completely different lessons. Your consciousness kept presenting similar situations, not because the world is limited, but because your internal lens was being tested. Would you respond the same way again, or would something finally shift? And here's a quiet check that matters. Ask yourself whether you truly didn't see the pattern, or whether you saw it and hoped it would resolve itself without requiring a change from you. This isn't about blame, it's about clarity. Awareness grows when you're willing to admit where you negotiated with yourself, where you postponed alignment for convenience, comfort, or familiarity. What's important now is this. Those patterns didn't disappear. They evolved into discernment. What once felt like confusion is now a sharper signal. You sense misalignment earlier. You feel when something costs too much. The repetition trained you to detect subtle inconsistencies before they turn into crises. That's not accidental. That's earned. And if you're paying attention, you'll notice something else. The same situations don't hook you the same way anymore. You pause sooner. You question faster. There's less tolerance for self-betrayal. This is how preparation reveals itself, not as certainty, but as reduced tolerance for what drains you, which leads naturally to something deeper. Because once patterns are recognized, another question emerges. If repetition was training, then what about the discomfort you kept trying to avoid? What about the pain that seemed unnecessary at the time, but kept shaping you anyway? That's where the next layer begins. Pain rarely arrives announcing its purpose. It doesn't explain itself, it doesn't ask permission. It simply shows up and interrupts whatever story you thought you were living. And because of that, most people label it as failure, punishment, or proof that something went wrong. But what if pain was never meant to be interpreted that way? What if it was never about correction through suffering, but about training through pressure? Think back to moments that hurt more than you expected. Not dramatic scenes, just quiet breaking points. The conversation that changed how you saw someone. The loss that didn't destroy you but rearranged you. The disappointment that forced you to sit with yourself longer than you wanted. Those moments didn't feel meaningful at the time. They felt inconvenient, unfair, sometimes even cruel. Yet they altered your internal structure in ways comfort never could. Comfort keeps you functional. Pain makes you attentive. There is a reason certain experiences left a deeper mark than others. Not because they were bigger, but because they bypassed your defenses. Pain has a way of cutting through mental noise. It brings you into the body. It slows time. It forces presence. When something hurts, you can't fully escape it with explanations. You feel it first, then you try to understand it. That sequence matters. If pain were punishment, it would weaken you consistently. But that's not what actually happens. What happens is more subtle. You become more precise, more selective, less willing to tolerate what once felt acceptable. Your nervous system learns, your attention sharpens. You start noticing early signals instead of waiting for collapse. That is not damage, that is conditioning. There's a misunderstanding that strength is built through ease. But look at how anything resilient is formed. Muscles don't grow without resistance. Bones strengthen through stress. Even decision-making improves after consequences are felt, not imagined. Pain introduces friction, and friction reveals where you were moving on autopilot. Many of the wounds you carry didn't come from a single event. They came from repetition, staying too long, giving too much, ignoring internal limits. Pain accumulated until it became impossible to dismiss, not because life wanted to hurt you, but because something in you wasn't listening yet. Pain became the volume knob that finally got your attention. And here's a hard truth, handled gently. Some pain only exists because growth was postponed. If you ignore a signal long enough, it doesn't disappear. It intensifies. That doesn't mean you deserve it. It means your system is designed to prioritize awareness over comfort. When quiet messages don't land, louder ones follow. But notice this. Pain didn't erase you. It didn't turn you into someone smaller. It made you more nuanced. You learned where your limits are. You learned what drains you. You learned what kind of environments your system cannot thrive in. These insights weren't theoretical. They were embodied. You know them now because you felt the cost of not knowing them before. There's also a difference between pain that refines and pain that repeats unnecessarily. The refining kind leaves you clearer, even if tender. The repeating kind stays chaotic because its message is still being resisted. This is where honesty matters again. Not all pain is noble, but all pain contains information. The question is whether you extract it or relive it. You might notice that certain experiences hurt deeply but briefly, while others linger. Lingering pain often points to something unresolved, not something random. It's like pressure held in the system. Until it's acknowledged, it doesn't release. This is not psychological weakness. It's how human processing works. What isn't integrated remains active. Pain also strips away illusions, not dramatically but quietly. You stop pretending you're fine with things you're not fine with. You stop explaining away discomfort. You become less interested in appearances and more interested in alignment. This shift doesn't feel heroic. It feels sobering, but it's real. And there's something else most people don't talk about. Pain trains timing. After enough hurt, you sense when to leave earlier, when to speak sooner, when to pause instead of push. That timing didn't come from intuition alone. It came from memory encoded in the body. Your system remembers what it costs to ignore itself. If you look closely, you'll see that pain never asked you to become harder. It asked you to become more honest, more responsive, more self-respecting. That's why people who have endured and integrated pain often move differently. They don't rush. They don't force. They listen better, especially to themselves. And now, something subtle is happening. As pain does its work, another signal begins to surface. Not loud, not dramatic. A quiet inner nudge that starts showing up earlier than pain ever did. A sense of knowing without proof. A bodily response that arrives before logic. This is where many people get confused and label it anxiety. But it's not. It's the next layer of training making itself known. At some point, many people begin to distrust their own inner signals. A feeling rises before a decision, before a meeting, before a message is sent. And the first label that comes to mind is anxiety. Something feels tight. The body reacts. The mind looks for a reason, and instead of asking what the signal is pointing to, it gets dismissed as overthinking, fear, or weakness. But intuition rarely announces itself calmly. It often arrives through sensation before it arrives through language. Intuition is quiet, but it is not always gentle. For years, you may have felt a subtle resistance before certain choices, a hesitation that didn't come with a clear explanation, a sense of not this without knowing what the alternative was. Because it didn't come with evidence, you learned to mistrust it. You told yourself you were being irrational, too sensitive, too nervous. And slowly, you trained yourself to override that signal with logic, social expectations, or urgency. Anxiety and intuition can feel similar in the body, especially at first. Both can quicken the breath. Both can tighten the chest. Both can create restlessness. The difference isn't in intensity, but in direction. Anxiety scatters attention. It pulls you into imagined futures, looping scenarios, and unresolved fears. Intuition, on the other hand, narrows focus. It points. It highlights something specific, even if you don't yet understand why. But when you haven't been taught to tell the difference, everything uncomfortable gets grouped together and dismissed. Here's something worth noticing. Anxiety tends to grow louder the more you engage with it mentally. The more you analyze, the more it multiplies. Intuition doesn't need repetition. It appears, delivers the signal, and then waits. If you ignore it, it doesn't argue. It just returns later, often through stronger sensations or external friction. Many people confuse intuition with anxiety because intuition often contradicts the plans you've already made. It doesn't care about convenience. It doesn't care about appearances. It doesn't explain itself in full sentences. That makes it inconvenient in a world that values certainty and speed. So the mind looks for a more acceptable explanation. Anxiety feels medical, logical, manageable. Intuition feels mysterious, uncomfortable, hard to justify. Over time, this mislabeling creates distance between you and your own internal guidance. You start trusting external validation more than your own signals. You wait for proof before listening, even though intuition rarely provides proof in advance. Its job isn't to convince you. Its job is to inform you. There's also a cultural factor at play. We live in a system that rewards endurance, not discernment. Pushing through discomfort is often praised. Pausing because something feels off is often questioned. So when intuition says slow down, step back, or don't engage, it gets framed as fear. But fear wants safety through control. Intuition wants alignment through awareness. If you reflect honestly, there were moments when your intuition was calm but firm. A simple inner no, a sense of heaviness before agreeing to something, a quiet pull away from a path that looked good on paper. Those moments didn't come with panic, they came with clarity, but because they disrupted momentum, they were ignored. Anxiety usually demands reassurance. Intuition doesn't ask for reassurance, it asks for respect. Another way to notice the difference is timing. Anxiety often shows up after the mind starts spinning. Intuition often shows up before any conscious thought forms. It's the body responding before the story catches up. A shift in posture, a change in breath, a sudden fatigue when considering something that should excite you. These are not random, they are signals processed faster than language. Science is beginning to catch up with this idea. The body detects patterns before the conscious mind can articulate them. The nervous system registers inconsistencies, threats, and misalignments through subtle changes long before you can explain them. That doesn't make the signal irrational, it makes it efficient. The problem is not that intuition is unreliable. The problem is that it speaks a language you were never taught to listen to. So instead of asking, "Why am I anxious?" a more useful question sometimes is, "What is this sensation responding to?" Not what you think about it, not how it looks to others, but what your system is reacting to right now. Often when you sit with that question without rushing to fix or suppress the feeling, clarity emerges. Not dramatic clarity, practical clarity. This doesn't mean every uncomfortable feeling is intuition. That's another trap. Sometimes discomfort is just unresolved stress. Sometimes it's old conditioning. This is where discernment develops, not by silencing sensations, but by observing patterns over time. Does this signal repeat in similar situations? Does it quiet down once a decision aligns, or does it escalate when ignored? Intuition becomes clearer the more you stop arguing with it. What's interesting is that as you learn to recognize intuition, it starts arriving earlier and with less intensity. It doesn't need to shout if it knows it will be heard. This is why people who are deeply attuned to themselves often seem calm, not because they feel less, but because they listen sooner. And this shift opens the door to something even more subtle. Once intuition is no longer mistaken for anxiety, you begin to notice that it isn't just reacting to the present. Sometimes it seems to anticipate, to know before you know. That's when the question changes again. Not whether you can trust your intuition, but how it can sense things before your conscious mind ever catches up. There are moments when something registers before you can name it, before thought, before emotion, before the body even reacts in an obvious way. A subtle shift happens, almost like a quiet alert in the background of awareness. You don't know what it means yet, but you know something has changed. This is not imagination. This is not mysticism. This is how consciousness actually works. Most people assume perception begins in the senses and moves inward. You see something, hear something, feel something, and then meaning is created. But that's only half the story. In reality, meaning often arrives first and the body catches up later. By the time you feel fear, tension, or excitement, something deeper has already registered the pattern. You've experienced this more times than you realize. That instant sense that a conversation will not go well before a word is spoken. The quiet knowing that a situation is ending before any evidence appears. The sudden calm or unease that comes out of nowhere, long before logic has time to assemble an explanation. These moments are easy to dismiss because they don't fit into linear thinking, but they are consistent, and consistency matters. The body is fast, but consciousness is faster. What we call the body's reaction is often a translation, not the original message. Your nervous system responds to information that has already been processed at a deeper level. This is why you sometimes feel something and only later understand why. The understanding didn't create the feeling, it arrived late to the event. Research in neuroscience and physiology has begun to point in this direction. Subtle signals appear in the body milliseconds or even seconds before conscious awareness catches up. Heart rhythms change, attention shifts, the system prepares before the mind explains. This doesn't mean consciousness is supernatural. It means it is distributed. It's not confined to deliberate thought. It operates beneath language. And because it operates beneath language, it's often ignored. You were taught to trust what you can explain, to justify decisions, to rely on visible evidence. But consciousness doesn't wait for permission from logic. It tracks patterns across time. It notices tone, timing, inconsistencies, and emotional residue. It compares the present moment with thousands of stored impressions you don't consciously remember. Then it delivers a signal. Simple, direct, often uncomfortable. The problem is not that the signal is unclear. The problem is that it arrives before you're ready to accept it. This is why so many people say, "I knew it," only after something happens. Not because they're rewriting history, but because the knowing was real and unacknowledged. Consciousness perceived the shift. The body tried to communicate it. The mind came in last and looked for reasons not to listen. There's also a timing mismatch that creates confusion. Conscious awareness likes conclusions. Consciousness itself is more interested in direction. It doesn't always tell you what will happen. It tells you where alignment is breaking or forming. That's enough information to act, but not enough to feel safe. So the signal gets postponed. Another important distinction is this. Consciousness perceiving first doesn't mean it predicts events in a dramatic way. It senses trajectories. It notices when something is moving toward coherence or away from it, toward ease or toward friction, toward expansion or contraction. These are not abstract ideas. They are lived sensations that show up quietly. You might notice that when something aligns, the body softens even before you understand why. Breathing deepens, effort reduces. There is less internal resistance. When something is off, the opposite happens. Tightness, restlessness, fatigue. These are not emotional reactions to thoughts. They are responses to information already processed. What complicates this is conditioning. Many people have learned to distrust early signals because acting on them once felt costly. Saying no created conflict, leaving early created guilt, speaking up created tension. So consciousness learned to whisper instead of speak clearly. But whispering doesn't mean absence, it means adaptation. As you become more attentive, you start to notice that these early perceptions are neutral. They don't panic, they don't dramatize, they simply indicate. It's the mind that adds fear afterward. The initial signal is often clean, almost factual. A sense of this doesn't fit or this matters, no story attached. And here's something subtle but important. Consciousness doesn't just perceive personal situations this way, it also responds to larger shifts, changes in collective mood, social tension, uncertainty in the environment. You may feel more alert, more unsettled, or more sensitive without a clear personal reason. That doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means you're perceiving context, not just content. Some people call this being overwhelmed, others call it being intuitive. In reality, it's being receptive. Consciousness is picking up on instability, transition, or pressure in the wider field. The body hasn't found a personal explanation yet, so the sensation floats without a label. This is where many people try to numb, distract, or pathologize the experience. But what if it's not a problem to solve? What if it's information to interpret? As awareness deepens, perception becomes less about reacting and more about orienting. You start to sense that your internal preparation isn't just about your own life events. It feels bigger than that. Like you're tuning into a moment that isn't isolated but shared. And this realization naturally opens another layer of understanding. Because if consciousness can perceive before the body and beyond the personal, then what you're sensing now may not be yours alone. There is a strange feeling many people share right now, even if they describe it differently. A sense that the ground is shifting, not dramatically but persistently. Old structures feel unreliable. Certainties that once held things together don't hold the same weight. Conversations change tone. priorities quietly rearrange themselves. And while the world seems louder and more unstable on the surface, something inside you may feel unusually alert, as if you're being asked to pay attention in a new way. This isn't coincidence, and it isn't imagination. Every period of major collective change creates a kind of background pressure. You can't always point to it, but you feel it. Systems strain, narratives break down, people react faster and listen less. There's more noise, more urgency, more confusion. But alongside that chaos, there's another response happening in quieter individuals. A sharpening, a sensitivity, a growing intolerance for what feels false or misaligned. What's important to understand is this: collective shifts don't affect everyone the same way. The external events may be shared, but the internal preparation is personal. You may have noticed that while others are desperate to return to normal, you don't feel the same pull. Not because you enjoy instability, but because something in you knows the old normal no longer fits. You may feel restless without knowing what you're restless for. Drawn inward, yet more aware of the world than before. Less patient with surface-level explanations, more attuned to what feels real. This is not withdrawal, it's calibration. Long before collective change becomes visible, individuals begin adjusting internally. Values shift before systems do. Awareness shifts before language catches up. This is how transitions actually work, not through sudden awakenings, but through accumulated readiness. And readiness doesn't look impressive, it looks confusing, it feels unfinished. It often comes with doubt. You weren't prepared by reading headlines or predicting outcomes. You were prepared through lived experience, through patterns that forced discernment, through pain that refined boundaries, through intuition that learned to speak earlier. All of that personal work didn't happen in isolation. It aligned you with a moment that is now unfolding more visibly. This is why you might feel both overwhelmed and grounded at the same time. Overwhelmed by the scale of change. Grounded by the sense that you've been here before, emotionally if not historically. You've practiced navigating uncertainty. You've already questioned assumptions others are just beginning to notice. You've already let go of illusions that many are still defending. That doesn't make you superior. It makes you early. Collective turning points often reveal a split in attention. Some people cling harder to certainty. Others become more flexible, more observant. Neither response is moral. They are adaptive. But if you're someone who feels more open, more sensitive, more alert right now, it's not because you're fragile. It's because your system is tuned to change rather than preservation. There's also grief in this, even if you can't name it. Grief for versions of the future that no longer make sense. Grief for identities built around stability that is dissolving. Grief for conversations that can't be had the same way anymore. This grief doesn't come from pessimism. It comes from clarity. And clarity is often lonely before it becomes shared. It's easy to assume that collective change requires a collective awakening, some dramatic moment where everyone suddenly understands what's happening. But real shifts rarely work like that. They move through individuals first, through quiet recalibrations, through people who feel out of sync with the dominant rhythm, but can't explain why. Your preparation didn't come with instructions, it came through friction, through repetition, through subtle internal rewiring. You learned to tolerate ambiguity, you learned to pause instead of react, you learned to listen beneath words. These are not spiritual achievements. They are functional skills for uncertain environments. That's why this moment feels familiar, even though it's new. You may also notice a strange impatience with superficial solutions. Easy answers don't satisfy you. Polarized narratives feel incomplete. You're less interested in being right and more interested in being honest. This isn't indecision, it's discernment maturing. Collective turning points don't ask everyone to do the same thing. They ask different people to hold different capacities. Some build, some question, some stabilize. Some observe, some translate. Your personal preparation aligns you with one of these roles even if you can't name it yet. And here's the part many people miss. Preparation doesn't mean readiness in the way we usually imagine. It doesn't mean confidence. It doesn't mean certainty. It means availability. The ability to respond without collapsing. The ability to stay present without demanding immediate resolution. If you feel like you're standing at the edge of something without clear instructions, that's not a failure of understanding. That's the nature of transitions. They don't announce themselves clearly because clarity is one of the outcomes, not one of the prerequisites, which brings us to a subtle trap. When moments like this arise, many people wait. They look outward for a sign, an event, a signal that confirms something extraordinary is happening. They expect a clear marker that says, "Now you're awake, now it begins." But waiting for that kind of confirmation can quietly disconnect you from what's already unfolding inside you. Many people carry an invisible expectation that one day something outside of them will finally confirm what they've been sensing. A moment so clear, so undeniable, that it removes all doubt. A sign, a revelation, a sudden shift that makes everything make sense at once. This idea is subtle, but powerful, and it quietly keeps people waiting. Waiting feels reasonable, it feels humble, it feels safe. If awakening is something that happens to you, then you don't have to risk acting before you're sure. You don't have to trust your own timing. You can just stay alert, gather information, and wait for the moment when the universe, society, or fate makes the first move. The problem is that this moment almost never arrives the way people imagine it. External awakenings are dramatic in stories, but real awareness rarely announces itself with certainty. It doesn't arrive as a clear event you can point to later and say, "That was it." More often, it unfolds quietly, unevenly, through small internal shifts that don't look impressive from the outside, and because of that, they're easy to dismiss. There is a deep conditioning behind this mistake. We are taught that important things come with markers, diplomas, announcements, milestones, before and after moments that can be validated by others, so it feels natural to assume that awakening should follow the same pattern, that there will be a clear signal saying, "Now you see, now you're ready." But awareness doesn't work like that. It's not granted, it's noticed. Waiting for an external awakening often masks another fear, the fear of acting without permission. If no one confirms what you're sensing, then moving forward feels risky. You might be wrong. You might change direction too soon. You might outgrow things before others do. Waiting postpones that discomfort. There's also a hidden hope in waiting. The hope that awakening will feel clean, that when it comes, confusion will dissolve, and clarity will feel stable and reassuring. But real awareness often feels the opposite at first. It disrupts certainty. It removes old explanations before offering new ones. It leaves you standing in an in-between space, where the old no longer fits and the new hasn't fully formed. That space is uncomfortable, so people assume they're not there yet. What's rarely acknowledged is that waiting itself can become a form of avoidance. Not intentional avoidance, but learned. You stay alert, you consume ideas, you observe change, but you delay integration. You keep awareness at a distance, as if it's something you'll step into later, rather than something already active within you. If you're honest, you may recognize this pattern. Moments when you felt something shift internally, but you brushed it aside because it didn't match your expectations. Times when insight appeared quietly, without emotional fireworks, and you thought, "This can't be it. It's too subtle, too ordinary." But awakening isn't a single event. It's a reorientation of attention. Another reason people wait is comparison. They look for models, someone more certain, more articulate, more visibly transformed, and they assume that awakening should look similar for them. But awareness adapts to the person. It meets you where you are, using your language, your experiences, your limits. It won't feel identical to anyone else's. This is why external confirmation is unreliable. It pulls your attention outward, away from the only place awareness actually operates. Inside lived experience, inside sensation, decision-making, tolerance, and response. You don't wake up by witnessing something extraordinary. You wake up by noticing how you relate to what's already happening. There's also a subtle delay built into waiting. When you expect a future awakening, you treat the present moment as preparation only, as if real engagement starts later. But consciousness doesn't pause. It's already responding, already adjusting. The question isn't whether awakening will happen. It's whether you'll recognize it while it's happening. Many people imagine awakening as clarity without effort. But what actually happens is responsibility increases. You notice where you're misaligned sooner. You feel the cost of self-betrayal more clearly. You become less able to ignore what you already know. That doesn't feel like a reward at first. It feels like pressure. So the mind says, this can't be awakening. It feels too inconvenient. Waiting for an external signal also creates a hierarchy where awareness is something rare, reserved for special circumstances or special people. But awareness is functional. It emerges when it's needed. And right now, many people are sensing change not because they've reached a spiritual milestone, but because the environment requires more perception. If you're feeling unsettled, observant, less patient with surface explanations, that doesn't mean you're waiting for awakening. It may mean you're already inside it, just not in the way you were taught to expect. The real shift doesn't happen when the world changes dramatically. It happens when you stop postponing trust in your own perception, when you realize that no external event is coming to certify what you already sense. And once that realization begins to settle, another truth starts to surface. What you've been calling chaos may not be a sign to wait longer, but an invitation to engage differently with what's already unfolding. Chaos rarely announces itself as opportunity. It arrives as disruption, as noise, as the sudden sense that the rules you relied on no longer apply. Plans stop working the way they used to. Effort produces less clarity, not more. And because humans are wired to seek stability, the first instinct is to treat chaos as an error, as something to fix quickly or escape from. But chaos doesn't show up to end things. It shows up when something can no longer continue in its current form. When structures are stable, growth is incremental, predictable, almost invisible. But when structures become misaligned with reality, they don't dissolve politely. They destabilize. Chaos is what happens when old forms lose coherence before new ones are fully shaped. It's not a punishment, it's a transition state. If you're honest, you can feel the difference between destructive chaos and revealing chaos. Destructive chaos fragments you. It pulls attention in every direction and leaves you depleted. Revealing chaos does something else. It strips away false certainty. It forces questions you were postponing. It exposes where energy has been leaking for a long time. What makes chaos frightening is not its intensity, but its lack of clear instruction. There's no manual for moments like these. No checklist that tells you exactly what to rebuild first. That uncertainty triggers the urge to restore the past, even if the past was already unsustainable. This is where many people misread the moment. They treat chaos as a sign that something went wrong, instead of a signal that something outdated is finally breaking down. Think about your own life. The moments that felt most chaotic were rarely random explosions. They were accumulations, tension ignored, signals delayed, adjustments avoided. Chaos arrived when subtle correction was no longer enough, not because you failed, but because awareness was ready for a deeper shift. Chaos interrupts autopilot. When things are orderly, you can move through life without questioning much. You repeat patterns, you follow expectations, you rely on momentum. Chaos removes that option. It slows you down or knocks you off balance, so you're forced to notice what you were previously skimming over. Values, priorities, limits, truths you knew but didn't act on. This is why chaos often feels strangely clarifying beneath the discomfort. Amid confusion, certain things become obvious. What no longer matters, what you can't pretend about anymore, what drains you versus what stabilizes you. This clarity doesn't come from analysis, it emerges from contrast. Another misunderstanding is believing chaos demands immediate action, that you must decide quickly, rebuild fast, or regain control. But chaos is not a test of speed, it's a test of orientation. The question is not how fast you can restore certainty, but whether you can stay present long enough to sense what wants to change. Rushing to end chaos often means rebuilding the same structure that collapsed. Different details, same foundation. That's not resolution, that's repetition. There's also a quiet invitation hidden in chaos that many people miss. Chaos exposes flexibility. It shows you where you can adapt, where you can let go, where you can respond differently than before. It reveals capacities you didn't know you had because they were never required. Patience, discernment, resilience without hardness. And importantly, chaos doesn't ask you to become someone new overnight. It asks you to stop being who you can no longer sustain. That distinction matters. This is not about self-improvement. It's about self-honesty. If you feel disoriented right now, it may be because your internal compass is recalibrating. Old reference points don't work. External signals are inconsistent. So awareness turns inward, not to escape the world, but to find a more reliable axis. This inward shift can feel like withdrawal, but it's actually reorientation. Chaos also reveals where identity has been overly attached to roles, outcomes, or narratives. When those dissolve, there's grief, not because they were wrong, but because they were familiar. Chaos doesn't erase meaning, it clears space for meaning to reorganize. This is why chaos often comes with fatigue, not just physical tiredness, but decision fatigue, emotional saturation. The system is processing change at multiple levels. Pushing through this state with willpower alone usually backfires. What's required instead is listening, observing what stabilizes you naturally, what grounds you without effort. Over time, if you don't fight chaos, it starts to soften. Not because answers arrive, but because resistance decreases. You stop demanding certainty before movement. You allow partial clarity, small adjustments. This is how new coherence forms, not through control, but through responsiveness. And here's something subtle. Chaos doesn't just dismantle externally, it activates memory. Old experiences resurface, dreams intensify, synchronicities increase. Not as mystical signs, but as the mind and consciousness searching for relevant material to navigate change. Information rises when it's needed, which brings another layer into focus. During chaotic periods, many people notice meaningful coincidences, conversations that land differently, books appearing at the right time, phrases that echo something they've been thinking but haven't said out loud. These aren't instructions, they're cues. Reminders that awareness has been preparing pathways long before the moment demanded them. Chaos, then, is not the end of the path. It's the point where the path stops being obvious. And when that happens, you begin to realize that something in you has always known how to navigate without clear maps, leaving signals along the way, waiting for you to recognize them. At some point, looking back stops feeling random. Moments that once seemed disconnected begin to line up in a quiet, unsettling way. Not perfectly, not neatly, but enough to make you pause. A book that appeared at the right time. A sentence someone said years ago that suddenly makes sense now. A dream you dismissed that mirrors your present reality. These weren't instructions, they were clues. When people hear the phrase higher self, they often imagine something distant, elevated, almost mythical. But the truth is simpler and more intimate. Your higher self is not above you, it's ahead of you. It's the part of you that already moved through certain realizations and left markers along the way, knowing you would only recognize them when you were ready. Clues are never obvious in the moment. If they were, they would interfere with choice. They don't force direction. They suggest it. They show up softly, almost politely, respecting your timing. You could ignore them without consequence at first. That's important. Awareness matures through recognition, not pressure. Think about how many times something caught your attention without you knowing why. A topic you kept returning to. A question that wouldn't leave you alone. A feeling that a certain phase of life was temporary, even while you were inside it. These weren't random curiosities. They were signals from a part of you that already understood where this was leading. Your higher self doesn't communicate through commands. It communicates through resonance. When something aligns with where you're going, it lingers. It repeats. It finds different ways to reach you. Through people, through patterns, through inner discomfort that nudges you out of stagnation. This is why clues often feel subtle or even confusing. They don't come with explanations because explanations would satisfy the mind too quickly. Clues are meant to activate awareness, not end inquiry. They keep you engaged, slightly unsettled, curious enough to keep moving. Many people only recognize these clues in hindsight. They say things like, "I should have known," or "it was always there." But that doesn't mean you missed something. It means the clue did its job. It stayed dormant until your perception caught up. Timing matters more than intelligence in this process. Your higher self also uses repetition strategically, not to annoy you, but to train recognition. The same message may appear in different forms across years, different voices, different contexts, same underlying theme. Each time it lands a little deeper. Each time your resistance softens slightly. There's also an emotional signature to these clues. They often arrive with a strange mix of familiarity and discomfort. Familiar because they resonate with truth. Uncomfortable because they challenge your current identity. Growth always threatens the version of you that learned how to survive. Dreams are one of the quieter channels. Not symbolic puzzles to solve, but emotional previews. They show you what you're processing before you consciously accept it. A recurring image, a repeated location, a feeling that lingers after waking. These aren't predictions, they're integrations happening beneath language. Then there are synchronicities, not magical coincidences, but meaningful alignments. They feel personal, not because they revolve around you, but because they intersect with your inner state. A conversation that answers a question you hadn't spoken yet. A phrase that echoes your private thoughts. These moments don't give certainty. They give confirmation that you're not disconnected from the process. Importantly, clues don't disappear when ignored. They adapt. If one route fails, another opens, not forcefully, creatively. That's why life sometimes seems persistent in pushing you towards certain realizations. Not because there's only one path, but because some insights are necessary for coherence. Your higher self also understands pacing. It doesn't overwhelm you with everything at once. It spaces clues out. It allows you to live fully inside phases that you will eventually outgrow. This isn't deception, it's compassion. You couldn't have integrated certain truths earlier without destabilizing yourself. There's also a misconception that clues are always positive or comforting. Some come as friction, as repeated disappointment, as attraction to what ultimately doesn't work. These are not mistakes. They are experiential clues. They teach through contrast. They show you what alignment is not, so you can recognize it when it appears. As you become more attentive, the relationship with these clues changes. You stop demanding certainty from them. You stop asking them to justify themselves. You simply notice. You track patterns. You observe how your energy responds. This is how dialogue forms between who you are and who you're becoming. And perhaps the most important realization is this: your higher self never rushed you. It trusted that you would arrive. It left breadcrumbs, not deadlines. It allowed detours, because detours build context. They add depth. They make recognition meaningful instead of mechanical. Now, standing where you are, some of those clues may be lighting up again, not louder than before, but clearer, less symbolic, more practical. They're no longer asking you to notice, they're asking you to choose. Now that you're here, there's nothing more you need to wait for. No sign in the sky, no external permission, no perfect moment. Your consciousness didn't bring you this far by accident. Everything you lived, felt, questioned, and endured shaped your ability to recognize this moment when it arrived quietly, without drama. The choice in front of you isn't about becoming someone new. It's about stopping the habit of denying what you already sense. You can keep explaining it away, postponing alignment, waiting for certainty. Or you can begin responding differently, in small, grounded ways, starting now. Awareness doesn't demand grand gestures. It asks for honesty in the next decision, the next pause, the next yes or no. If this message reached you, let it be active, not just understood. Write this phrase in the comments, so I know you stayed until the end. I'm done waiting for permission. And if this content resonated with you and you want to keep exploring this path, choose one of the videos appearing on your screen now and keep going.